Nobel laureate and world poet Kabiguru Rabindra Nath Tagore has gifted us with beautiful short stories. His stories touch the most sensitive side of the human emotion, many a times unspoken. Welcome to Timeless Stories with Nina. I am your host Nina. In each episode of my podcast, I shall share a story. Stories of the known and the unknown. Stories of adventure. Stories of love. Stories of thriller. Stories of fantasy. Stories, in my opinion, help us to briefly escape from the monotonous cycle of life. Close your eyes and dive into your power of imagination while you hear me narrating a story of your favorite genre. Welcome to the episode 3 of Timeless Stories with Nina. In this episode, I shall read Rabindranath Tagore's English translation of Tasher, Desh, The Kingdom of Cards. The Kingdom of Cards, written by our very own Kabiguru, is a cheerful, humorous, satirical portrayal of a society ruled by strict conventions. Though the story can be classified as a comedy, you cannot ignore the political and the satirical undertone hidden in the story. Once upon a time, there was a lonely island in a distant sea where lived the kings and the queens, the aces and the knaves in the kingdom of cards. The tens and nines with the twos and threes and all the other members had long ago settled there. But these were not twice-born people like the famous court cards. The ace, the king, and the knave were the three highest castes. The fourth caste was made up of a mixture of the lower cards. The twos and the threes were the lowest of all. These inferior cards were never allowed to sit in the same row with the great court cards. Wonderful indeed were the regulations and rules of that island kingdom. The particular rank of each individual had been settled from time immemorial. Everyone had his appointed work and never did anything else. An unseen hand appeared to be directing them wherever they went according to the rules. No one in the kingdom of cards had any occasion to think. No one had any need to come to any decision. No one was ever required to debate on any new subject. The citizens all moved along in a listless groove without any speech. When they fell, they made no noise. They lay down on their backs and gazed upward at the sky, with each prim feature firmly fixed forever. There was a remarkable stillness in the kingdom of cards. Satisfaction and contentment were complete in all their rounded wholeness. There was never an uproar or violence. There was never any excitement or enthusiasm. The great ocean, crooning its lullaby with one unceasing melody, lapped the island to sleep with 1,000 soft touches of its waves' white hands. The vast sky, like the outspread azure wings of the brooding mother bird, nestled the island round with its downy plume. For on the distant horizon, a deep blue line betokened another shore. But no sound of quarrel or strife could reach the island of cards to break its calm repose. In that far-off foreign land across the sea, there lived a young prince whose mother was a sorrowing queen. This queen had fallen from favor and was living with her only son on the seashore. The prince passed his childhood alone and forlorn, sitting by his forlorn mother, weaving the net of his big desires. He longed to go in search of the flying horse, the jewel on the cobra's hood, the rose of heaven, the magic roads, or to find where Princess Beauty was sleeping in the ogre's castle, over the 13 rivers and across the 7 seas. From the son of the merchant at school, the young prince learned the stories of foreign kingdoms. From the son of the Kotwal, he learned the adventures of the 2 genii of the lamp. And when the rain came beating down and the clouds covered the sky, he would sit on the threshold facing the sea and say to his sorrowing mother, "Tell me, mother, a story of some very far-off land." And his mother would tell him an endless tale she had heard in her childhood of a wonderful country beyond the sea where dwelt Princess Beauty. And the heart of the young prince would become sick with longing as he sat on the threshold, looking out on the ocean, listening to his mother's wonderful story, while the rain outside came beating down and the grey clouds covered the sky. One day, the son of the merchant came to the prince and said boldly, "Comrade, my studies are over. I am now setting out on my travels to seek my fortunes on the sea. I have come to bid you goodbye." The prince said, "I will go with you." And the son of Kotwal also said, "Comrades, trusty and true, you will not leave me behind. I will also accompany you." Then the young prince said to his sorrowing mother, "Mother, I am now setting out on my travels to seek my fortune. When I come back once more, I shall surely have found some way to remove all your sorrows." So the 3 companions set out on their travels together. In the harbour were anchored the 12 ships of the merchant, and the 3 companions got on board. The south wind was blowing, and the 12 ships sailed away, as fast as the desires which rose in the prince's breast. At the Corn Shell Island, they filled one ship with conches. At the Sandalwood Island, they filled a second ship with sandalwood. And at the Coral Island, they filled a third ship with corals. 4 years passed away, and they filled 4 more ships, one with ivory, one with musk, one with cloves, and one with nutmeg. But when these ships were all loaded, a terrible tempest arose. All the ships sunk with their cloves and nutmeg, musk and ivory, coral and sandalwood and conches. But the ship with the 3 companions struck an island reef, buried them safe ashore, and itself broke into pieces. This was the famous Island of Cards, where lived the ace and the king and the queen and knave, with the 9s and 10s and all the other members, according to the rules. Up till now, there had been nothing to disturb that island's stillness. No new thing had ever happened. No discussion had ever been held. And then, all of a sudden, the 3 companions appeared, thrown up by the sea, and the great debate began. There were 3 main points of dispute. First, to what caste should these unclassed strangers belong? Should they rank with the court cards, or were they merely lower caste people to be ranked with the 9s and 10s? No precedent could be quoted to decide this weighty question. Secondly, what was their clan? Had they the fairer hue and bright complexion of the hearts, or was theirs the darker complexion of the clubs? Over this question, there were interminable disputes. The whole marriage system of the island, with its intricate regulations, would depend on its nice adjustment. Thirdly, what food should they take? With whom should they live and sleep? And should their heads be placed southwest, northwest, or only northeast? In all the kingdom of cards, a series of problems so vital and critical had never been debated before. But the three companions grew desperately hungry. They had to get food in some way or the other. So, while this debate went on with its interminable silence and pauses, and while the aces called their meeting and formed themselves into a committee to find some obsolete dealing with the question, the three companions themselves were eating all they could find and were drinking out of every vessel and breaking all regulations. Even the twos and threes were shocked at this outrageous behavior, and the three said, "Brother twos, these people are openly shameless." And the twos said, "Brother threes, they are evidently of a lower caste than ourselves." After their meal was over, the three companions went for a stroll in the city. When they saw the ponderous people moving in their dismal processions with prim and solemn faces, the prince turned to the son of merchant and the son of Kotwal and threw back his head and gave one stupendous laugh. Down Royal Street and across A Square and along the Nave embankment ran the quiver of this strange, unheard of laughter. The laughter that, amazed at itself, expired in the vast vacuum of silence. The son of Kotwal and the son of the merchant were chilled through the bone by the ghost-like stillness around them. They turned to the prince and said, "Comrade, let us get away. Let us not stop for a moment in this awful land of ghosts." But the prince said, "Comrades, these people resemble men. So I'm going to find out by shaking them upside down and outside in whether they have a single drop of warm living blood left in their veins." The days passed one by one, and the placid existence of the island went on almost without a ripple. The three companions obeyed no rules or regulations. They never did anything correctly, either in sitting or standing or turning themselves or lying on their back. On the contrary, wherever they saw these things going on precisely and exactly according to the rules, they gave way to inordinate laughter. They remained unimpressed altogether by the eternal gravity of those eternal regulations. One day, the great court guards came to the son of Kotwal, the son of merchant, and the prince. "Why are you not moving according to the rules?" they asked. The three companions answered, "Because that's our wish." The great court guards, with hollow, cavernous voices, as if slowly awakening from an age-long dream, said together, "Wish? Who is Wish?" They could not understand who Wish was then, but the whole island was to understand it in times to come. The first glimmer of light passed the threshold of their minds when they found out, through watching the actions of the prince, that they might move in a straight line in an opposite direction from the one in which they had always gone before. They made another startling discovery, that there was another side to the cards which they had never noticed in the past. This was the beginning of the change. Now that the change had begun, the three companions were able to initiate them more and more deeply into the mysteries of wish. The cards gradually became aware that life was not bound by regulations. They began to feel a secret satisfaction in the kingly power of choosing for themselves. But with this first impact of wish, the whole pack of cards began to totter slowly, and then tumble down to the ground. The scene was like that of some huge python awaking from a long sleep as it slowly unfolds its numberless coils with a quiver that runs through its whole frame. Until now, the queens of spade, clubs, diamond, and heart had remained behind curtains with eyes that gazed vacantly into space or else remained fixed upon the ground. Now, all of a sudden, on an afternoon in the spring, the Queen of Hearts from the balcony raised her dark eyebrows for a moment and cast a single glance upon the prince from the corner of her eye. "Great God!" cried the prince. "I thought they were all painted images, but I am wrong. They are women after all." Then the young prince called to his side his two companions and said in a meditative voice, "My comrades, there is a charm about these ladies that I have never noticed before. When I saw that glance of the queen's dark, luminous eyes, brightening with a new emotion, it seemed to me like the first faint streak of dawn in a newly created world." The two companions smiled, and a knowing smile, and said, "Is that really so, Prince?" And the poor Queen of Hearts from the day went from bad to worse. She began to forget all rules in a truly scandalous manner. If, for instance, her place in the row was beside the knave, she suddenly found herself quite accidentally standing beside the prince instead. At this, the knave with motionless face and solemn voice would say, "Queen, you have made a mistake." And the poor Queen of Hearts' red cheeks would get redder than ever. But the prince would come gallantly to her rescue and say, "No, there is no mistake. From today, I'm going to be the knave." Now, it came to pass that, while everyone was trying to correct the mistakes of the guilty Queen of Hearts, they began to make mistakes themselves. The aces found themselves elbowed by the kings. The kings got muddled up with the knaves. The nines and tens assumed they belonged to the great court cards. The twos and threes were found secretly taking the places specially resented for the fours and fives. Confusion had never been so confounded before. Many spring seasons had come and gone on that island of cards. The kokil, the bird of spring, had sung its song year after year, but it had never stirred the blood as it stirred it now. In days gone by, the sea had sung its tireless melody, but then it had proclaimed only the inflexible monotony of the rule, and suddenly its waves were telling, through all their flashing light and luminous shade and myriad voices, the deepest yearnings of the heart of love. Where have the prim, round, regular, complacent features of this island vanished? Here is a face full of love-sick longing. Here is a heart beating wild with regrets. Here is a mind racked sore with doubts. Music and shines and smiles and tears are filling the air. Life is throbbing, hearts are breaking, passions are kindling. Everyone is now thinking of his appearance and is comparing himself with others. The ace of clubs is musing to himself that the king of spades may be just passably good looking. But, says he, when I walk down the street, you have only to see how people's eyes turn towards me. The king of spades is saying, why on earth is that ace of clubs always straining his neck and strutting about like a peacock? He imagines all the queens are dying of love for him, while the real fact is, here he pauses and examines his face in the glass. But the queens were the worst of all. they began to spend all their time in dressing themselves up to the nines, and the nines would become their hopeless and abject slaves. But their cutting remarks about one another were more shocking still. So, the young men would sit on the leaves under the trees, lolling with outstretched limbs in the forest shade, and the young maidens, dressed in pale blue robes, would come walking accidentally to the same shade of the same forest, by the same trees, and turn their eyes as though they saw no one there, and look as though they came out to see nothing at all. And then one young man, more forward than the rest, in a fit of madness would dare to go near to a maiden in blue. But as he drew near, speech would forsake him. He would stand there tongue-tied and foolish, and the favourable moment would just pass. The kokil birds were singing in the boughs overhead. The mischievous south wind was blowing. It disarrayed the hair, it whispered in the ear, and stirred the music in the blood. The leaves of the trees were murmuring with rustling delight, and the ceaseless sound of the ocean made all the mute longings of the heart of a man and maid surge backwards and forwards on the full springtide of love. The three companions had finally brought into the dried-up channels of the kingdom of gods the full flood tide of a new life. And though the tide was full, there was a pause, as though the rising waters would not break into foam, but remain suspended forever. There were no outspoken words, only a cautious going forward, one step and receding two. All seemed busy, heaping up their unfulfilled desires like castles in the air or fortresses of sand. They were pale and speechless. Their eyes were burning, their lips trembling with unspoken secrets. The prince saw what was wrong. He summoned everyone on the island and said, "Bring the flutes and the cymbals, the pipes and the drums. Let all be played together, and raise loud shouts of rejoicing. For the Queen of Hearts this very night is going to choose her mate." So the tens and the nines began to flow on their flutes and pipes. The eights and sevens played on their sackbuts and voiles, and even the twos and threes began to beat madly on their drums. When this tumultuous gust of music came, it swept away at one blast all those shyings and moppings. And then, what a torrent of laughter and words poured forth! There were daring proposals and locking refusals, gossip and chatter and jest and merriment. It was like the swaying and shaking and rustling and soughing in a summer gale of a million leaves and branches in the depth of a forest. But the Queen of Hearts, in a rose-red robe, sat silently in the shadow of a secret bower and listened to the great uproarious sound of music and mirth that came floating towards her. She shut her eyes and dreamt her dream of love, and when she opened them, she found the prince seated on the ground before her, gazing up at her face. And she covered her eyes with both her hands and shrank back, quivering with an inward tumult of joy. And the prince passed the whole day alone, walking by the side of the surging sea. He carried in his mind that startled look, that shrinking gesture of the queen, and his heart beat high with hope. That night, the serried, gaily dressed ranks of young men and maidens waited with smiling faces at the palace gates. The palace hall was lighted with fairy lamps and festooned with the flowers of spring. Slowly, the Queen of Hearts entered, and the whole assembly rose to greet her. With a jasmine garland in her hand, she stood before the prince with downcast eyes. In her lowly bashfulness, She could hardly raise the garland to the neck of the maid she had chosen. But the prince bowed his head and the garland slipped to its place. The assembly of youths and maidens had waited for her choice with an eager, expectant hush. And when the choice was made, the whole vast concourse rocked and swayed with a tumult of wild delight, and the sound of their shouts was heard in every part of the island and by ships far out at sea. Never had such a shout been raised in the kingdom of gods before. And they carried the prince and his bride and seated them on the throne and crowned them then and there on the ancient island of gods. And the sorrowing mother queen, on the far-off island shore, on the other side of the sea, came sailing to her son's new kingdom in a ship adorned with gold. And the citizens are no longer regulated according to the rules. Good, bad, they have finally learned to follow their wish. Thank you for listening to Timeless Stories with Nina. To connect with me, follow me on my Instagram and Facebook pages, #TimelessStoriesWithNina. If you have an interesting story to share, write to me at the email address given in the description box. My next episode will be yet another interesting story. Till then, goodbye.